protect you. So there are a number of these stories. I'd ask unanimous consent to put them in the record at this time.
Without objection.
And I just want to say, when you listen to the naysayers and the bad news bears and everyone who comes here and starts criticizing, get to the bottom of it. Look at this 9 million number, headed toward 10 million, and understand what's happening in our nation. People are getting health coverage. And here's the deal. The way we did it, Obamacare, is just like it was in Massachusetts when Governor Romney put it through. That's where the ideas came from. We didn't do another plan. We did that type of plan. And it's working in Massachusetts, where I think, is it 95% of the people are covered. Now, I'll close with just a couple of other protections that are in effect so that you can see why when Ted Cruz and my colleagues come to the floor, my Republican friends, and want to repeal Obamacare, I'm saying, no way. You want to work with us to make it better? Absolutely. But I'm not going to let my constituents lose their insurance. You want to tell your constituents they can lose their insurance? That's your business. Don't mess with California. Look, already in effect, 3 million young adults insured through their parents' plan. 71 million Americans getting free preventive care, such as checkups and birth control and immunizations. You want to take that away from Texans? Be my guest. You're not going to do it, because we're not going to let you do it. Health reforms in effect. 17 million kids with pre-existing conditions like asthma and diabetes cannot be denied coverage. Insurers cannot cancel your health insurance because you get sick. No lifetime limits on coverage. No annual limits on coverage. You can't deny coverage or charge more for pre-existing conditions. You can't charge women more than men. And this is the annual limits I just talked about. You can't put annual limits on a plan. Women. 2/3 of women are on the minimum wage, okay? 2/3 of women are on the minimum wage. So if you don't support raising the minimum wage, you're taking on the women, and that's a fact. And they're not students. They're not youngsters. Look, women now can get contraception so they can decide that they will plan their families. Well women visits, STD screening, breastfeeding support, domestic violence screening, gestational diabetes screening, HIV screening, HPV testing. This is all happening because of Obamacare. So I want to say to anyone within the sound of my voice, if I haven't put you to sleep, this is what I want to say. When anyone gets on the floor and starts complaining about Obamacare and wanting to repeal it, you just say to them, why do you want to hurt the people of this country who have waited so long to get health insurance, who have suffered so much, who have gone bankrupt because somebody had the misfortune of getting cancer? Why do you want to go back to those days? That's not good for America. Just because it was President Obama who signed the bill? The Affordable Care Act is now called Obamacare. What a wonderful thing for this president. But I got to tell you, anyone who stands up and says they want to take away these benefits are hurting the American people. And I'm going to collect these stories. I'm going to come to the floor and read them. This is about real people getting secure insurance for the first time in their lives, and it's affordable. And no one is going to turn back the clock. We can't. We can't go back to those days. So, Mr. President, we have to deal with making this health care bill work the best it can. We have to work on income inequality. We have to come back and still work for unemployment insurance extension for the 1.5 million Americans who desperately need help. We have to work on making sure that there's a bright future for our families. I thank you very much, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President, Senator from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I had a few comments on another issue today that I'm going to get to in a moment, but I just wanted to take this opportunity. It's a special anniversary in Florida that I wanted to commemorate, and it's that of the Naval Air Station in Pensacola, which is now celebrating its centennial anniversary. ANS Pensacola, as it's more commonly known, is a Florida institution. It's really the cradle of naval aviation. The first naval airplane flight from Pensacola took place back on February 2nd, 1914. There are over 325,000 alums who have gone on to bravely serve with honor in our wars, and they've also delighted crowds across the country as part of the Blue Angels. They've made their mark, by the way, on the Florida Panhandle and on our nation's defense in the process of doing these things. In fact, one of our colleagues, John McCain, trained there and, of course, went on to serve not just our country heroically and admirably, but also then served us here in the United States Senate. Others that have passed through there, including many NASA astronauts, Alan Shepard, Neil Armstrong, among others, began their aviation careers at NAS Pensacola and, of course, eventually went on to become astronauts and made an impact on American and world history that's immeasurable. By the way, NAS Pensacola is also the final resting place of thousands of fallen warriors at the Barrancas National Cemetery, a place that truly humbles visitors and reminds us to be thankful that America has been blessed with so many courageous patriots throughout our history. Today there are over 17,000 servicemen and women who continue their service to America at NAS Pensacola, and there's an additional 7,000 civilians who support the base's operations. They're part of a real community where parents are raising their kids and where many veterans who once served there have decided to make it their permanent homes. We're proud of this in the Florida Panhandle, and it makes our state a better place. So as the centennial celebrations get underway this weekend, I wanted to join our state and our entire nation in celebrating 100 years of military excellence at NAS Pensacola. We truly give thanks to all the brave men and women who have made this military installation a crown jewel of our national defense and contributed to America's exceptional history. I wanted to take a moment before we left here on recess to bring that point up. I also wanted to take a moment to talk about an emerging problem with the health care law that has only begun to filter out in the news cycle, but I think bears watching in the days and weeks to come. As we all know, a key part of the health care law is the exchanges, which are theoretically supposed to be competitive private marketplaces where individuals can go online either through their state exchange or the federal exchange and buy health insurance at a competitive price, and you can choose between these different plans. That's the idea behind a health exchange. And in and of itself, the idea of an exchange is not a bad one if appropriately administered, and it doesn't come accompanied with all the other things that the health care law came accompanied with. But there's a problem with the way the exchanges are now designed that have not yet received the attention they deserve, but I promise you're going to be hearing a lot about it in the days to come. The technical term for it is risk corridors, and what it basically means is that companies who participate in an exchange or a marketplace in insurance are told that there is a reinsurance plan in place that will protect them in case of loss or catastrophic loss. So, for example, let's say you are an insurance provider and you go into a marketplace and then it turns out that the demographics of the groups that signed up for your plans didn't turn out the right way, or there was an enormous spike in health care costs, whatever it may be, and you suffer dramatic losses, a risk corridor is in place to protect you from that. The reason why is, number one, it's a safety net per se for the industry on a short-term basis, and the reason why that's important is because you want patients' bills to be paid, and you don't want people to go unable to see their bills paid and providers to be left out. The problem is that applying that to the health care exchange is going to prove extraordinarily problematic. Because what's happened over the last few weeks, as we predicted would happen, is that not enough young people are signing up for the exchange. In order for health insurance to work, you have to have enough younger and healthier people on it. If you have a health insurance plan that's largely composed of people that are guaranteed to get sick, economically it doesn't work. And there's no dispute about that. In fact, by the administration's own statistics, they say that at least 38% of the enrollees in the exchanges had to be under the age of 34 in order for the exchanges to work in an actuarially sound way. So based on the assumption that that's what was going to happen, insurance companies bid on these exchanges and offered a product and have begun to sign people up. The problem is that so far that figure is not being met. Now, the numbers are just starting to come in. We don't know the full picture yet, but the trends are troubling. Number one is not enough people are signing up. The target goal is a total of about 7 million people or more. By a deadline that's now been extended to March 31st, the number is less than 2.2 million. Now, there's still 8 weeks left or so, so we'll see what happens, but the trends are not positive. Here's an even more troubling trend. Only 30% of national enrollees are from that demographic that I described to you. Only 30% are under the age of 34. In Florida, it's only 25%. Here's the fundamental problem that we have right now with the exchanges, beyond all the other ones that we've already discussed ad nauseum. Not enough people are signing up, and not enough people under the age of 34 are signing up. The result is that the way this is trending now, the exchanges are becoming more like a high-risk pool and less like a true competitive exchange. And here's why that's problematic. If companies lose money, as they are going to, if you look at these figures, and as the companies themselves anticipate, in fact, in some of the early disclosures these companies are making, you're starting to see the forecast of losses. When these companies, if these trends continue, lose money because not enough people under the age of 34 signed up for them and not enough people signed up, under the law, under Obamacare, they will be entitled to a payout from the high-risk pool. And this is a program that's in place for the first 3 years of these exchanges. And what that means is a taxpayer-funded bailout of Obamacare. That means the taxpayers of the United States, your money, is going to go from your pocket into the pocket of these private companies. Now, what the private companies will tell you is, look, we bid on this product when you told us the rules were going to be this. But since then, you've changed those rules even more. And so what was already bad has gotten worse. And there is not enough awareness about this. But we're going to be hearing about it in the weeks to come. As we get closer to the reality that billions of dollars in taxpayer money is going to be used to bail out these exchanges, there is going to be growing outrage around the country. And people are going to want answers. And I hope my colleagues are starting to think about what we need to do. That's why I filed the bill in November. It's called the Obamacare Taxpayer Bailout Prevention Act. And what it would do is it would eliminate this provision that allows for the tax-funded bailouts of these exchanges. And this problem, as we get closer to it, the numbers are as bad or worse than we anticipated. So in the months to come, here's what you can expect to see. First, you can expect to see that companies are now going to say, well, we need our money. Under the law, we were promised this high-risk, bailout. We signed up for it under that assumption. Now we need taxpayer money. And I predict the second thing you're going to see is going into next year, as companies begin to prepare their filings for next year, some companies are going to decide that we are not participating in Obamacare exchanges next year at all, which means there's going to be less choices and less competition and therefore higher premiums. Other companies are going to say, we'll participate, but only at these premiums, and they're going to be significantly higher than the ones we've seen this year, meaning it will be even less affordable, meaning even less people under the age of 34 will sign up, meaning even more money will have to go from the taxpayer to bail out the exchanges. Now, we're still in mid-January, and these numbers could change, but nobody realistically expects them to. And in fact, I have yet to hear from anyone knowledgeable about this subject who has said to me, oh, don't worry, in the next 8 weeks, another 5 or 6 million people will sign up, and we're going to get to over 30% of national enrollees. We're going to get to over 38% of the people signing up being in the demographic of 34 or under. So it's only mid-January, but I come to the floor today to sound the alarm that this is coming, so that people across this country know that we are on the verge, we are weeks and months away from transferring potentially billions of dollars from taxpayers to private companies to bail out these exchanges. And I promise you this will not be the last time you hear about this. And I encourage my colleagues as they go home on this recess and talk to people, get informed about this subject, because you're going to be hearing a lot about it in the weeks and months to come. This is a very serious threat to the law itself, by the way. This is unsustainable. At a time when we have a $17 trillion debt, when so many Americans are struggling to find employment that pays them enough to live off, when so many Americans have seen the jobs they once had disappear and cannot find a job to replace it, when so many Americans are struggling with a growing cost of living in every aspect of their lives, child care, student loans, utility bills, you name it, to be told that at a time when all of these challenges are happening in the personal economy of so many people, that billions of dollars of taxpayer money is going to go to bail out this law, there is going to be collective outrage across the political spectrum in this country, and rightfully so. And here's the last point I would make, and then I'll close. If this law has to be bailed out, it's one more reason why it doesn't work. These exchanges are supposed to be private, competitive marketplaces where companies could actuarially and soundly price a product and sell it at an affordable rate. That is not where they are headed. We are headed towards a day soon, as early as next year, and you'll see the filings this year, when these companies are going to decide either not to participate or to participate but only if they can charge substantially higher premiums with higher co-payments and higher deductibles. And on top of it, the only way they'll participate is if they're promised this bailout. We are going to hear a lot about this in the weeks to come. And I encourage my colleagues, irrespective of how you feel about this law, I cannot imagine any of us believing that we are at a time in our nation's history, given the challenges we face now, where we should be bailing out this plan, with taxpayer money being transferred to private companies to keep them in business. But that's where we're headed. And we better be able to do something about it soon, because people are not going to stand for it. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Vermont is recognized.
Mr. President, as chairman of the Senate Veterans Committee, I want to take a moment to thank all the members of that committee for their hard work over the last year. At a time when there is obviously an enormous amount of divisiveness and partisanship here in the Senate, I am happy to report that by and large there has been a great deal of bipartisan effort being made in the Veterans Committee, and I think very productive work as well. Mr. President, today, as the chairman of the committee, I have introduced the most comprehensive piece of veterans legislation that we have seen in a very, very long time. The Comprehensive Veterans Health and Benefits and Military Retiree Pay Restoration Act of 2014 delivers on the promises that we have made to our service members, and I believe will have the support of members of the Senate and of the House, because it addresses virtually every single issue that the veterans community has been concerned about. What we have done now is taken two omnibus bills and wrapped it into this legislation. In addition, we have taken other pieces of legislation passed by the committee, and we have added to that based on some recent developments. This legislation is the product of a year of bipartisan work and includes provisions important to almost every single veteran service organization and dozens of members of the Senate, Republican, Democrat, and Independent, many of which were reported out of the Veterans Committee with strong bipartisan support. Mr. President, this legislation completely eliminates the cuts that were made to the military retiree cost of living adjustments. I know that there was great concern here in the Senate from Democrats and Republicans about that cut, as well as in the House of Representatives, and I am happy to say that this legislation completely eliminates the cuts that were made to the military retiree cost of living adjustments. As we all know, the recently bill passed today, the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2013, that bill that was passed a few days ago would lower cost of living adjustments for military retirees by reducing the annual adjustment by 1% until age 62. The American people have spoken very loudly and very clearly. They have told the Congress to restore those cuts to military retirees, and we have listened. I applaud the House and the Senate for restoring these cuts for disabled military retirees and survivors in the Appropriations Act that we passed today. So today we took care of part of the problem, but we have got to do more, and what the comprehensive veterans bill that I have introduced today does is restore the full COLA to all military retirees, every single retiree. This bill restores these COLAs and does much, much more. And I would like to take a moment, Mr. President, to highlight some of the key provisions of this comprehensive piece of legislation. And let me tell you, Mr. President, this legislation is based on listening very carefully to what the veterans organizations have told us in private meetings, in hearings, and at some of the very, very large hearings that we have held with the American Legion, the VFW, the DAV, and many other service organizations. So let me very briefly touch on some of the provisions that we are addressing, some of the concerns that we are addressing in this comprehensive veterans legislation, which, I should add, is fully paid for. It is fully paid for. In the first omnibus bill that we passed, S-944, the Veterans Health and Benefits Improvement Act of 2013, we dealt with in-state tuition assistance for post-9/11 veterans, an issue of great concern to young veterans and to all of the veterans organizations. This package includes provisions the committee's ranking member, Senator Burr, and I worked together on that would help service members transition back into civilian life by making recently separated veterans eligible for tuition at the in-state rate. Given the nature of our armed forces, service members have little to no say as to where they reside during military service. Therefore, many of these service members have not had sufficient time to establish residency by the time they go back to school. This legislation would help the transition of our brave men and women who have sacrificed so much in defense of our country by giving them a fair shot at attaining educational goals without incurring an additional financial burden. We address that issue in this legislation. Mr. President, clearly one of the issues that has been an embarrassment to all of us is the degree of sexual assault that we have seen in the military. And what this legislation does is address that issue as well. While the Pentagon, Congress, and other stakeholders continue to work to end sexual assault within the military, something we have got to focus on, we must, nonetheless, do everything we can to ensure that the VA is a welcoming place for those who have survived sexual assault. That is why this legislation includes important provisions that would improve the delivery of care and benefits to individuals who experience sexual trauma while serving in the military. These provisions were inspired by Ruth Moore, a veteran who struggled for 23 years to receive VA disability compensation. It would expand access to VA counseling and care to active duty service members and members of the Guard and Reserve who experience sexual assault during inactive duty training. It also takes a number of steps to improve the adjudication of disability compensation claims based on military sexual trauma. This legislation would give VA additional tools to provide victims of sexual trauma with the care and benefits they need to confront the emotional and physical consequences of these horrific acts. Sexual assault in the military is unacceptable, and this committee is in a significant way addressing that issue. Mr. President, one of the concerns that we have heard from many veterans and veterans organizations is the issue of over-medication, that many of our veterans come back and receive, in some cases, 5, 10 different types of pills to address some of the very serious problems that they have. What this bill does is expand, among many other things, access to complementary and alternative medicine. The VA already does a good job in that area. This would expand their capability to provide complementary and alternative medicine. Maintaining VA's world-class health care system remains a priority for our committee. I am pleased that we were able to respond to calls from veterans to increase access to complementary and alternative medicine for the treatment of chronic pain, mental health conditions, and chronic disease. By expanding access to these treatment options such as acupuncture, meditation, massage therapy, and many others, we can enhance the likelihood veterans get the care they need in the way that works for them. And these treatments are becoming more and more popular. More and more veterans want access to them, and that is what we do in this legislation. Additionally, this legislation calls for VA to promote healthy weight in veterans by increasing their access to fitness facilities, as a healthy weight is critical to combating multiple chronic diseases, including diabetes and health disease. In other words, the most cost-effective and best way to treat disease is to prevent that disease by making sure that our veterans have the opportunity to keep healthy, and this legislation does that as well. Mr. President, this legislation further honors as veterans certain persons who perform service in the reserve components of the armed forces. I know how important this provision is to all those who wore this nation's uniforms as members of the reserves, and I am pleased we would finally honor their service with passage of this legislation. This legislation also expands benefits for surviving spouses, for the spouses of those who gave their lives to defend this country. And I want to make special note of provisions that will be included in this package that would also strengthen the benefits and services provided to surviving family members by addressing a number of concerns brought to the attention of this committee by the Gold Star wives in testimony last year. And obviously the Gold Star wives are the spouses of those soldiers who died in combat. Specifically, this bill would provide additional dependency and indemnity compensation for surviving spouses with children in order to provide financial support in the difficult period following the loss of a loved one. This bill would also expand the Marine Gunnery Sergeant John David Fry Scholarship to include surviving spouses of members of the armed forces who die in the line of duty. That means that surviving spouses would become eligible for post-9/11 GI Bill benefits, setting them and their families up for success in the years to follow. Mr. President, one of the issues that has occupied a great deal of time and energy on the committee deals with claim processing. We all know that for the last number of years, the VA has had a very significant backlog, and that is clearly not acceptable. When a veteran brings forth a claim, that claim should be processed in a reasonable period of time with a reasonable degree of accuracy. We are all too well familiar with the challenges of the claims backlog. I am very pleased to see that the VA is making significant progress on this complex issue. They are going from paper to digital. That is a huge process, and as a result, the backlog is declining. That is good news, but we have got to do more. This legislation would support VA's ongoing efforts and would make needed improvements to the claims system. Among a number of claims-related provisions, this bill for the first time would require the Department to publicly report on both claims processing goals and actual production. This would allow Congress and the public to closely track and measure VA's progress on this difficult issue. The Secretary of the VA, Eric Shinseki, has proposed a very ambitious goal for the end of 2015, and we want to make sure that they are on track. That is some of the provisions included in the first omnibus bill. Let me talk a little bit about the second omnibus bill, both of those bills passed unanimously out of committee. The Comprehensive Veterans Health and Benefits and Military Retirement Pay Restoration Act of 2014 includes provisions from S. 1581, a second omnibus bill that moved out of the committee with unanimous support at the November markup. And here are some of the provisions in that omnibus. The improvement and expansion of dental care. Mr. President, I don't know about New Mexico, but I can tell you that in Vermont, and in fact in many parts of this country, inability to access affordable dental care is a major, major crisis. It is true for the general public, and it is true for veterans as well. The truth of the matter is, right now, the VA, with the exception of service-connected oral problems, does not provide dental care to our veterans. And I think that that is a very significant omission. What this legislation does is, starting off with a large-scale pilot project, begin the effort to make sure that dental care becomes part of VA health care. And this is something that I think the veterans throughout this country will be very, very excited to learn about and to participate in. Mr. President, those are some of the provisions that were in the two omnibus bills. Now let me talk about, and they passed unanimously, let me talk about some other legislation that came out of the committee, in some cases with bipartisan support, but not unanimously. The first one deals with advanced appropriations for the VA, and that is S. 932, the Putting Veterans Funding First Act of 2013, and that was introduced, as I recall, by Senators Begich and Bozeman in a bipartisan way. And here's the story here, which is very important. As we saw last year, in the event of a prolonged government shutdown, the Veterans Administration would not have been able to issue disability compensation or pension payments or provide educational benefits to millions of deserving veterans. The truth of the matter was that during that shutdown, we were perhaps a week or 10 days away from disabled veterans and others not getting the benefits that for many of them is exactly what they depend upon. It's what they depend upon to buy groceries. It's what they depend upon to pay a mortgage, to pay their car payments. We were a week or 10 days away from those veterans not getting those benefits. I'm happy to say that in this legislation, we have addressed that issue, and we have moved forward with advanced appropriations for mandatory accounts at the VA. Mr. President, our economy is making slow progress. We are creating jobs, but nobody believes that we are anywhere near where we want to be. Real unemployment in this country is close to 13%, and in my view, we owe a great deal to veterans who have left their families, left their jobs, gone abroad, and then they come back and they're unable to find employment. And what our legislation does is put into this comprehensive bill the Renew Our Vow to Hire Heroes, S6, the Putting Our Veterans Back to Work Act of 2013. And this legislation would reauthorize provisions from the VOW Act to Hire Heroes Act of 2013, including a 2-year extension to the Veterans Retraining Assistance Program, which retrains unemployed veterans for high-demand occupations. And there are other employment provisions in this legislation as well. Mr. President, several years ago, under the leadership of our colleague Patty Murray, who was my predecessor as chair of the Veterans Committee, we proudly passed the Caregivers Act. And the Caregivers Act was a very important piece of legislation which said to families who are taking care of disabled veterans, we understand that what you're doing is very, very difficult, and we're going to give you some assistance. Mr. President, after listening to the concerns, that legislation that we have passed dealt with post-9/11 veterans and their families. But after listening to the concerns of pre-9/11 veterans and their family members, I introduced S-851, the Caregivers Expansion and Improvement Act of 2013, to extend eligibility for the caregivers programs to veterans' families of all eras. All eras. So we took this program, which is working well, and we said we are going to pay attention to the needs of all families who are taking care of men and women who put their lives on the line to defend us and have become disabled. And that is in this legislation as well. Mr. President, also in this legislation is language which will extend eligibility to enroll in VA health care, and that was S-1604. We all know that early diagnosis of health care conditions is critically important. Under current law, recently separated veterans have 5 years of free health care from VA, 5 years. This legislation would extend the period of time these individuals, including members of the active component, National Guard, and reserves, they will be eligible to enroll in VA health care system to 10 years post-deployment. So we go from 5 years to 10 years. This benefit has been incredibly helpful to our most recent generation of service members, and extending the enrollment period would allow more individuals to take advantage of VA's high-quality, cost-effective health care system, including important access to mental health care services. Additionally, this legislation simplifies the process for determining eligibility for enrollment in VA health care for lower-income veterans. Currently, VA uses an extremely complex calculation of geographic income thresholds that vary from county to county. You can have one veteran in one county in Vermont, another person living a mile away. One is eligible for VA health care because of his or her income. Another person with the same income is not eligible. My legislation establishes one income threshold per state, simplifies the process, and will enable more veterans to be eligible for VA health care. Mr. President, this legislation, and I'm wrapping up now, this legislation also includes S-131, the Women's, Veterans, and Other Health Care Improvements Act of 2013. With the widespread use of improvised explosive devices throughout Iraq and Afghanistan, both female and male service members have found themselves at increased risk for spinal cord, reproductive, and urinary tract injury. Many of these veterans dream one day of starting a family, but their injuries prevent them from conceiving. This legislation would help them fulfill their dreams. Now, Mr. President, as I mentioned earlier, we have 3 more important provisions I want to briefly touch upon. And that is, once again, the restoration of full COLA for all military retirees. In an effort to address concerns regarding the cost of living adjustments for all military retirees, this bill would reaffirm the commitment Congress has made to our service members and veterans by ensuring consistent and appropriate funding for military retirees and veterans. This very, very important provision is in this legislation. Furthermore, there has been a concern that many CBOCs, community-based outreach clinics, that have been planned all over this country have been unable to be built for a variety of technical reasons. We address that issue as well. This bill also improves access to mental health treatment for veterans. So let me conclude by saying this. We give a lot of speeches about the respect that we have for the men and women who have put their lives on the line to defend this country. And they have come forward to the Veterans Committee and they have said, we have concerns. We have concerns about health care. We have concerns about how quickly the benefits that we apply for come to us. They have been very loud and clear in saying, and we agree with them, that it is unacceptable that pensions promised to veterans have been cut. And there have been many, many other issues dealing with employment, dealing with education. What this bill does in a comprehensive way is to say to the veterans of this country, the millions and millions of people who have given so much to us, is that we hear your concerns. We hear your concerns, and we are going to address your concerns. I want to take this moment to thank the Majority Leader who is here, Senator Reid, who has been very, very not only supportive of veterans in general, but supportive of this effort to make sure that we keep our promises to the veterans of this country. So that bill has been introduced. My hope is that we can get it to the floor as soon as possible, and I hope very much, Mr. President, that in a partisan climate, that on this issue of keeping our promises to the men and women who have put their lives on the line to defend this country, that we can come together as a Senate and come together as a House and have the President sign this bill, which will mean so much to so many. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut is recognized.
Mr. President, I want to start by thanking Chairman Sanders of the Veterans Affairs Committee, where I serve, for his extraordinary vision and leadership, and join him in thanking the Majority Leader for his commitment to this kind of comprehensive and aggressive approach to revise and reinvigorate, to reinvent and reform veterans programs in a comprehensive and overarching approach. I will be speaking at greater length in the days and weeks to come, but I want to join him in committing all of us, I hope on a bipartisan basis, to this effort to fix the flaws and fulfill the vision that this nation owes to men and women who have served and sacrificed year after year. This program recognizes a fundamental truth. We are dealing with different populations of different ages, and within those populations, people with different needs and challenges. And a comprehensive program is necessary to address the obligation. It's an obligation that we owe them to make sure that we leave no veteran behind and keep faith with every man and woman who has served and sacrificed for this nation. It fixes the flaws of the last budget agreement that reduced the cost of living adjustment on retiree pension. It commits the nation to economic opportunity and real jobs, training for the jobs that exist now and the jobs of the future. It reforms loan and aid programs for college education and also for non-college education. And it addresses the gaps in health care, not just promising, but performing. And, of course, it will also necessarily help veterans who may be preyed upon by schemes and scams, legal or illegal. And that is a very desperate and challenging need for this nation to address. And hopefully it will do so on a bipartisan basis. There should be no reason, and there's no justification, for opposing an effort that is paid for, and I stress paid for, so that my hope is we will have bipartisan support for this visionary and courageous measure that says to Americans' veterans, we will keep faith with you. We will leave no veteran behind. One of the first promises I made 3 years ago in the first speech that I did from the floor of this chamber was that I would work and fight aggressively for the veterans of this nation, and I intend to work for this program, work to improve it, and continue to listen to the veterans of foreign wars, the Vietnam Veterans of America, the American Legion, all of the groups that represent our veterans so ably and speak for them. The voices and faces of Connecticut veterans have been with me always, and I see them always when I return. So I will work tirelessly for this program. Again, my thanks to all of the members of the Veterans Affairs Committee who will be supporting this program, and to our chairman, Senator Sanders, for his great leadership. And I thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Majority Leader.
I spend long periods of time on the floor compared to most senators. That's my job. And in doing so, I get to know people more than probably a lot of people. And over the many years, I've come to, we talk about a Senate family, and it really is a Senate family. And for me, it really is my family. I know that I'm being way too protective, and probably a lot of people say it's none of my business, but that's how I feel. And when people leave, I really feel bad, because you get to know people and you feel comfortable with the people you know. And the reason I mention this today is that one of the people that I've learned to really admire and appreciate and joke with and have a good time is one of the Republican staff members that's leaving. Patrick Kilcur, and I have no idea how if I pronounce his name right, it really doesn't matter. K-I-L-C-U-R, I don't know the name very well, but I've known him for a long time. We call him Patrick. And he's a Republican floor assistant. And if I have an issue and there's not a Democratic floor person around, I go to him. And he always gives me the answer that is honest and truthful. That's how we are so well served by these people who fill these spots in this wonderful historic chamber. He came to the Senate from Pennsylvania. He's from Pennsylvania to work for famous Pennsylvania Senator Arlen Specter. He spent a while working with him and then moved his way over here, started in the cloakroom, became a floor assistant as he is now. He's going to leave to go to work with one of my dear personal friends, Chris Dodd. I asked Patrick to come and spend a few minutes with me this week before he left, and we had a nice visit. I talked about my relationship with Chris Dodd and what a good experience it will be working for one of the great orators we've had in this during the time I've been here in the Senate, and one of the nicest people you could get to know, Chris Dodd. He'll be missed here. I will miss him, but I wish him the very best. He's always, you have to be very careful how you don't want to bring any bad luck, but he's engaged now. He's going to have a job. He can afford it. So I really wish him well. I will miss him. But I do say this. At least he has a first name. The person he works with, we don't even call him by his first name. We say Duncan, you know. So anyway, enough of that. I'm really will miss you. You know, you've had such a positive effect. You're always happy, and in spite of the pressure that's on you, people down in the, how should I vote? Why, how much longer? I'm trying to get people here who are late. How much longer is it going to be? And, you know, we go to you guys. So thank you very much. You've been great, and I look forward to visiting with you. And hopefully you and Dodd will invite me to watch one of those movies sometime. Because Chris Dodd is the leader of the Motion Picture Association of America. Mr. President, another just a short thing I want to say. Over the years, I've come to admire so very, very much our pages. They sacrifice to come here. It's not easy for them to come here to go to school for a semester, but they do. And this school that they go to is no soft school. It's hard. It's hard. They start school at 6 in the morning. I think it's 6 o'clock. They go for a couple hours. I know they are supposed to get up around 5. It is such a good environment. We have gone out of our way to have a pleasant place for them to live, the so-called dorm. They have monitors who watch them so very, very closely that parents don't have to worry about them. and it's a good experience. They see what's happened. They see what happens on a daily basis in the bowels of government, the United States Senate. And they'll go different ways. They're all juniors in high school. They'll go back and complete their high school and go on to college. But their entire life, they will never forget their experience here. I went just for a few days when I was a junior in high school maybe I was a senior. It was right after my junior year, to Boys State. And I made friends during that week that we spent there, 5 days that we spent there, that are my friends even today. That was many years ago. And that's the relationship these pages have developed. And so I say to them, thank you very, very much for the work you do. I was walking out, as I do, go out this back door the last night or two, and I see one of the pages, they have a door open, and I see all this list of stuff on the wall. So I say, what is that? Well, Mr. President, what they have to know, among other things, you know, each of us can be pretty, what's the right word? Demanding, I don't know if that's the right word, but we all, Senator McConnell and I, these podiums are here all the time, but we're the only two. So when a senator comes to speak, they need a podium. But they have to get the right podium. And the pages have to know when a senator wants to speak, what podium they get. Is it going to be a little one, middle-sized, half middle-sized, or a big one? Anyway, they have to know that. They have a big chart up there to make sure they don't make mistakes in. They make sure we have water. I don't like warm water. I don't like cold water. I don't like ice. But I've learned that in the meeting I had with the pages today, we all have our demands for water. Sparkling, half regular, half tap. Anyway, so, Mr. President, I am so grateful that they took the time to leave their homes, to come here, to go to school, to be students in the United States Senate. Mr. President, finally, we're going to have a vote when we come back on flood insurance. Menendez, Landrieu, Isaacson have worked on this long and hard. Landrieu has been, what's the right word, persistent, and that's an understatement. She has been on this like she can get on something and never get off of it. And we've come over the last several months within just inches, we thought, of being able to have an agreement and move it to the floor. But she and Isaacson have worked hard to get this consent request to bring to the floor, and they're always just a little bit short. So I'm filing cloture in just a few minutes on motion to proceed to this matter, and that'll be the vote we have when we get back. If they're able to work out an agreement, then we can always modify having that vote and move forward. As I understand it, there's 5 to 10 amendments they want to have that are relevant to that bill. We've all agreed that's okay. So we hope we can do that when we come back. I thank those senators for their good work. Mr. President, would I ask what the pending business is?
The motion to proceed to S-1926.
The motion to proceed to S-1926.
I have a cloture motion at the desk relative to that measure.
The clerk will report.
Clerk will report the motion.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close a debate on the motion to proceed to calendar number 294, S-1926, a bill to delay the implementation of certain provisions of the Biggert Waters Flood Insurance Reform Act of 2012 and for other purposes, signed by 17 senators as follows. Mr.
President, I would ask consent that the reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
I ask consent that the mandatory quorum required under Rule 22 also be waived, and the vote on the motion of vote cloture occur at 5:30 p.m. on January 27th.
Without objection.
I now ask, Mr. President, for unanimous consent that we proceed to period of morning business. Senators allowed to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
Without objection.
I ask consent we proceed to S-Res 335.
Clerk will report.
Clerk will report.
Senate Resolution 335, designating January 2014 as National Mentoring Month.
Is there objection to proceed
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure?
Without objection, the Senate will proceed.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed.
Motion to ask consent the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, motion reconsidered, be considered made laid on the table. There be no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
I ask consent. We now proceed to S-Res 336.
Clerk will report.
Senate Resolution 336, designating the first week of April 2014 as National Asbestos Awareness Week.
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure?
Without objection, the Senate will proceed.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed.
Motion to ask consent the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, motion reconsidered, be considered made laid on the table. There be no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
I'm told that S 1950 is due for its first reading.
The clerk will read the title of the bill for the first time.
Clerk will read the title of the bill for the first time.
S 1950, a bill to improve the provision of medical services and benefits to veterans and for other purposes.
Ask for second reading, but object my own request.
Objection is heard.
Objection is heard.
The bill will be read for a second time on the next legislative day.
Bill will be read for a second time on the next legislative day.
I ask consent notwithstanding the upcoming recess or adjournment of the Senate, the President of the Senate, the President pro tempore, and the majority and minority leaders be authorized to make appointments to commissions, committees, boards, conferences, or inter-parliamentary conference authorized by law by concurrent action of the two houses or by order of the Senate.
Without objection.
Without objection.
I unanimous consent that during the adjournment from Thursday, January 17th through Monday, January 27th, Senator Levin, Warner, and Rockefeller will be authorized to sign duly enrolled bills or resolutions.
Without objection.
I ask consent that when the Senate completes its business day adjourned and convene pro forma sessions only for no business conducted on the following dates and times. The following each pro forma session, Senate adjourned until the next pro forma session. Friday, January 17th, 11:15 a.m. Tuesday, January 21st, 10:30 a.m. Friday, January 24th, 9:30 a.m. And the Senate adjourned on Friday, January 24th until 2 p.m. on Monday, January 27th. Then on Monday, following the prayer and the pledge, the morning hour be deemed expired. Journal proceedings be approved to date. Time for two leaders be reserved for use later in the day. The following into leader remarks, the Senate resume consideration of the motion to proceed as 1926, the flood insurance legislation.
Without objection.
Next roll call vote, Mr. President, will be Monday, January 27th, 5:30 p.m. If there's no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that adjourn under the previous order.
The Senate stands adjourned until 11:15 a.m. tomorrow.
On a vote of 72 to 26, senators today approved a $1 trillion omnibus spending bill that funds the federal government through the end of the fiscal year on September 30th. That's a 2.5% increase over current sequester levels. The House passed the measure yesterday.